Pleasure. Thank you.
No worries.
I'm checking. Nice to meet you.
Okay.
Just the box? We're using the mouse, the keyboard.
I'll give you the instruction. So each team has 24 minutes to present its case to the judges. The time of presentation will be divided. The first 12 minutes of the presentation are considered as being protected, meaning that the judge cannot interrupt the team. The next 10 minutes are not protected. The beginning of this period will be when I ring the bell. When the non-protected period will end, I will ring it again. The judge has the possibility of interrupting the presentation in order to ask questions or clarification on the subject present at this moment. The judge will have to limit himself to 15 seconds to ask his question. The team has to answer the question but can then continue his presentation without waiting for the agreement of the judge. The judge cannot ask questions on the subjects already been covered or which has not been presented yet. These questions must be approached during the period of question at the end of the presentation. The last 2 minutes of the presentation are meant to conclude the presentation and are shielded from question of the judge. I will show board showing the remaining time where there will be 12 minutes remaining, 7 to 13 seconds, and the last 10 seconds by using my hand. And there's a period of question of 5 minutes at the end. So there will be.
Okay.
Yep.
So good afternoon. My name is Fabien Paquette, and I'm the General Manager of Pfizer Vaccines. Good luck for this afternoon.
I'm Ashley Coughlin, National Business Director for Vaccines. Good luck.
Hi, my name is Cynthia DeLillo. I'm Commercial Director for the Oncology Business Unit.
Good afternoon, I'm Rhonda O'Gallagher, and I'm Vice President of Corporate Affairs. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Good afternoon, Stella Nandan, and I'm the Business Unit Lead for the Inflammation and Immunology Business Unit. Good luck. Thank you.
Ready? Go.
Since its very beginnings, Pfizer has been driven by one understanding. The understanding that we are all in this together. That at the end of the day, we are all patients. And this understanding has driven Pfizer through the years to innovate and to produce drugs that not only save lives, but help us live together in this strong, unified community. Today, we're going to be talking to you about how Pfizer can reestablish trust with its consumers, with the industry, and in order to ensure that we are able to communicate this very important message that at the end of the day, everybody is a patient and that Pfizer is on the side of the consumers. So we're going to start off today by looking at who the patient is. So what does the pharmaceutical industry look like? Who are the players and the key stakeholders within this industry? We're then going to look at a quick diagnosis and as to what we see the key issues are within this industry and the symptoms that we really need to treat in order for Pfizer to be able to return to where they want to be. And then lastly, we're going to talk you through our prescription for how to solve these symptoms and how to treat our problem. And we're going to end it up with how this is going to lead to Pfizer's recovery and getting back to a very healthy and strong position.
Thank you very much. So I'll start off with the industry. So what exactly are we looking at in this day and age? So in the initial documentation that we have received, there are a lot of different ways to approach the problem. But at the end of the day, we had one thing in common that we want to look at, and it was an issue in terms of communication. But what exactly does that mean? And now let's move into the industry. So what is the industry or pharmaceuticals as an industry in general? So we're looking at a very slow cycle market. So there are three main criteria that I want to bring forward in terms of what the industry represents. So first of all, one important characteristics that we have identified in the industry is the importance of patent expiry and the delayed reimbursement. So how does that factor into your business model? But that brings forward the need to strengthen the brand equity and to make sure that there is a reason and a justification to defend such higher prices and the reason that what exactly do we need a brand as opposed to a generic product? So that's something that we'll be looking at today. The second one that was very important throughout the past couple of years is the issue of media and the negative publicity, especially when it appears to the types of actions and ethics that the consumers perceive the pharmaceutical industry as partaking in. And one area of such negative publicity is the digital environment. So how do unfiltered digital media actually influence consumer perspective? And the third one is our philosophy that everybody's a patient and the conflicting idea that research and development is still expensive. So when we're looking at the industry, we're looking at an industry where everybody at the end interacts with the product in one way, shape, or form, and we all benefit from the innovation and research that goes into developing a strong pharma industry in Canada and worldwide. So at the end of the day, we're looking at an industry where company reputation and trust are key and essential factors to a sustainable success in the pharmaceutical industry. So we mapped up also a couple the key stakeholders of the pharmaceutical industry. And at the center of this industry is patient well-being. And that is the one reason that Pfizer is operating in the business, to make sure that people are treated well and are treated with appropriate medicines and cutting-edge technology. So here we see three stakeholders that we will be looking at throughout our presentation. The first one is the President Advocacy Group and patient associations. Their primary motivation in patient well-being is to educate the patients to make sure that they make the best decisions for them and for their health. The second is the healthcare providers. So how do they interact? Well, it's mostly about providing care to the patients. We're talking about doctors, physicians who interact directly with the patients. And then finally is the provincial governments and the private payers who act as the funding for the patient well-being. And at the end of the day, we must appropriately consider how all of those stakeholders interact and try to find a way so that Pfizer can fit and grow within that environment.
So after looking at the patient, we realized that we need to come up with a diagnosis. Where do the issues lie for Pfizer today? And for us, the first symptom that we're seeing is actually a lack of trust within this industry, directed towards pharma companies such as Pfizer. When you look at Pfizer's message towards the different stakeholders, being consumers, the healthcare professionals, and the private payers, as well as the government payers, we're looking at the messages being received with negative feedback. Our interactions with our key stakeholders are not reaping the desired benefits and the desired results that we want to get out of them. So for example, starting off with the consumers, a lot of Pfizer's messaging is based on trying to convince the consumers that they should be buying and pushing their doctors to prescribe them Pfizer's drugs. But unfortunately, these messages are falling on deaf ears. The patients themselves do not trust big pharma companies such as Pfizer because they see the high costs of these drugs and the high prices of these drugs as an indication that the pharma industry is not a patient like you or me, but that the pharma industry is somebody that is out there to profit off of their illness. So these messages are creating a negative sort of feedback and interaction with the consumers. Looking at the healthcare professionals, Pfizer is currently using a lot of field force representatives and sampling in order to sell the drugs to these healthcare professionals. Unfortunately, however, since the 28% of healthcare professionals really see this sort of message being received from a pharmaceutical sales representative is not the ideal person that they would like to be sort of receiving this direct selling from. These messages are again falling a little bit on deaf ears. And the feedback that we're getting from the healthcare professionals is that they have a preference for the pharma sales representatives to actually deliver a message of helping them better understand their patients rather than trying to convince them to buy their drugs. And this, combined with the factor we mentioned with the consumers, is leading to sort of a lack of trust that feeds back into the messages being received in a negative way. Fortunately, however, when you look at Pfizer's interactions with the private payers and the governments, Pfizer is actually doing very well in this segment because the drugs that we're selling are actually ones that are innovative and they have the necessary cost benefits to achieve that reimbursement. And this is an area where we see that Pfizer needs to continue building on a strength that they already have. So ultimately, the takeaway from this part of our diagnosis is that this lack of trust is stemming from the different stakeholders within the industry are now exposed to the media, which is providing them with unfiltered sources of information, and Pfizer must now ensure that their interactions with these stakeholders not only have the right messages, but are actually built on a foundation of trust in order to elicit the desired feedback and interaction that they want in that regard. The second part of our diagnosis actually relates to the lack of education and why it is that the consumers and other stakeholders feel this lack of trust towards the pharmaceutical companies. And if you look at this, sort of the customer journey with Pfizer is that they start off by feeling sick and they get their diagnosis, but the pain point actually comes where they go to purchase their medication. So put yourselves in the shoes of the consumer. They show up at a pharmacy to purchase an over-the-counter medication, and when they go to pay for it, they see that Pfizer's drugs are they're priced at a much higher price point than the actual generic brand drugs. And what this signals to the consumer and what they see is that the big pharma industry is trying to make money off me being ill, and I really don't want to buy their branded medication. But in reality, what we want to convey to these consumers and what the real sort of message behind this is that the money that they're putting into these branded medications are actually going on to fund research and development that is saving lives, that is on the cutting edge of developing new drugs that are going to end up benefiting everybody that is a patient. And when we say everybody, we mean Pfizer included. And that is a key pain point for us. And we believe that in order to sort of achieve patient well-being, Pfizer must educate the consumers as to where the money is going when they're paying for these drugs, and to educate them about how expensive the research and development is, and to make them understand that Pfizer's not simply trying to profit off their illness, but they're actually trying to fund research and development to save their lives. So ultimately, we believe that through implementing the Your Pfizer campaign, Pfizer will be able to establish trust with the relevant stakeholders, allowing them to, through this basis of trust, educate their consumers and solidify their presence as a Canadian pharmaceutical leader.
So now that we understand that operating in the pharmaceutical industry in 2018 is fundamentally different than it has been historically because of the presence of media and its ability to really influence patients, we're going to move into the prescription of how Pfizer can move forward in the short, medium, and long term in order to regain the trust from their consumers and also to really benefit the Canadian healthcare industry as a whole, as you've identified as a key priority. So looking at the strategic overview, this will involve targeting both consumers and healthcare providers in order to reestablish trust and also educate them. So this is going to happen in a few main ways. But the overarching theme here is to be selling health to consumers rather than selling medication. Foremost, this circumvents some of the necessary regulatory approvals and the processes that might lag in the system of getting to advertise. But at the core of this, it's the importance of selling the Pfizer brand, selling this trust and reliability, giving consumers a reason to choose the branded over the generic drug by both trusting the brand and understanding that these dollars go towards funding innovation. So what does this actually mean? We're looking at the consumer campaign of Pfizer social media and Pfizer advocacy. We'll delve into this a little bit deeper, but in terms of the social media, we're looking at an ALS-style campaign where we actually engage different people to nominate others to surround around this campaign. In terms of advocacy, how we see Pfizer interact with groups like the Canadian Cancer Society, the Canadian Arthritis Association. It's important that consumers also think of Pfizer as an advocate. So we're going to look at positioning Pfizer as an advocacy group to work with these other advocates in order to unite around the community and really be a key player in understanding pressing Canadian health concerns. Then looking at the actual education, we'll be looking at awareness through targeted advertising, which as my colleague Amir mentioned, will really focus on emphasizing why do these dollars cost so much, really playing into the cost of research and why generic versus branded drugs have different price points. Then we're looking at healthcare providers. So there's two key aspects here, and we see these as more of quick wins. These are clearly things you do well as the 6th largest player in Canada, as number 1 in only 2011, you know how to deal with healthcare professionals. So we're recommending that you strengthen these relationships by first focusing on the ways that healthcare professionals want to interact with Pfizer through pharmacists and through really receiving patient-oriented information rather than actual information surrounding the diagnoses. And then for that second part, information surrounding diagnoses, opening a Pfizer portal to really share online information, because as 61% of healthcare providers indicated they would rather access this information online, we want Pfizer to be the one at top of mind so that when they go to prescribe, they think of Pfizer first. So now to get a little bit more into how we're looking at selling health rather than medication, we're going to dive into each component of this strategy a little further.
So we can start off with establishing consumer trust through the first part of our media campaign, the "If I Had $1 Million, I Would Cure" campaign. So the basis behind this and the idea behind this is that you have consumers sort of share these videos of themselves online saying, if I had $1 billion, this is the disease that I would cure. And the vision behind this campaign is to really have it catch on in a similar manner to as we saw the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge sort of catch on and become viral and go all over the world. We have a similar vision for this campaign, and the campaign is going to have benefits in sort of twofolds of benefits. The first is that it's again going to educate the consumers about how expensive R&D actually is for these sort of drugs, and secondly, it's going to establish trust by showing everybody that we're all patients, and that at the end of the day, we're putting this money into trying to cure diseases and change lives. So the way we actually want to sort of carry out this campaign is by first of all reaching out to social media influencers to really get the ball rolling on the campaign. And then we're going to start to involve people from the Pfizer community, so people like yourselves actually getting involved with the campaign to demonstrate to your consumers and to other stakeholders that this is something that is really close to heart and close to home. And then lastly, we're going to sort of integrate the Canadian public and reach the public at large and get them to participate in the campaign with the underlying benefit of both educating them and establishing trust.
So another key component that we mentioned is really integrating Pfizer as an advocacy group. So how this will look is having actual members of the Pfizer community connect with consumers in order to identify key concerns. So what this will mean is having them run similar to how the Canadian Cancer Society would or the Arthritis Society would, really engage in the community and run different events. And we'll actually get into, in particular, a run. And how this run will work is we'll invite different advocacy groups to participate in the run, fundraise for their charities, because at the end of the day, Pfizer is really working to treat all of these different concerns and conditions. And then whoever raises the most money, has the most people show up to the event, shows the highest level of engagement, Pfizer would match their donation to show goodwill and a commitment to the community and a commitment to really concentrating on the health concerns that are pressing for Canadians. So by establishing this advocacy group and beginning this annual run, Pfizer will be able to really orient itself for Canadians as a company that understands the needs of its consumers and really engages as patients for patients.
Then moving on to just building customer trust. In the long run, we also want to show a human face to not only Pfizer as medication, but also Pfizer as a company with people working behind in its office. So we want to run some segments, 1 minute, to really showcase the faces of Pfizer and why are they actually doing what they're doing. So the key goal is to build trust, educate, and show the human face of Pfizer, something that in today's media landscape is not quite clear. So what we'll be running is 1 minute profile segments on television showcasing the faces of Pfizer. So who are they? What are they working? What are they working on? And most importantly, why are they working on it? So what drives the staff of Pfizer to actually develop new drugs, try to break and cure those diseases that has been ailing a lot of people for a long time? So that is one way to really bring and build trust between Pfizer and the community. But now we've been talking about building trust and educating the consumer market. Now let's try to move on. How can we actually take those two principles and apply them to healthcare professionals? And it's a two-part plan that integrates itself seamlessly. So on one part, it's about trying to build trust between the Pfizer staff, the representatives, and the healthcare professionals. You currently have a good program in place. One-on-one interaction in sales is the way to go. However, through our research, we've analyzed that healthcare professionals really want to be able to use Pfizer representatives as resources for medication and the product offerings. So we will promote kind of changing the relationship from something from sales to a full-on resource. And that philosophy is continued all the way to the Pfizer portal. So now we're shifting from building trust to educating healthcare professionals. So what exactly is the Pfizer portal? So all prospective or current clients will have access to the Pfizer portal, which will be an online resources that allows healthcare professionals to research, view latest industry news, publications, and developments within Pfizer. So this one will be able to educate the healthcare professionals in the long run.
So now what we really need to delve into is how does this impact Pfizer in a very important time? In the short and the medium and the long term, when we see the reins of social media are reigning tremendously fierce on the industry. So looking at this implementation, there are a few things that you need to do more immediately over a 3-year horizon and then over more of a 5-year horizon. So immediately we're looking at this sort of quick win, which looks at strengthening the relationships with healthcare providers and pharma in order to ensure that pharmacists and healthcare providers are getting the information that they need so that they prescribe Pfizer when it comes to prescription medicine. Then we're looking at more of the over-the-counter impact of how we interact with consumers, educate them, and establish trust. So we're looking at launching the If I Had $1 Billion social media campaign, and that's a pretty immediate term solution. We see that if we engage with social media influencers now, that's the kind of thing that doesn't require a lot of money to instigate. So we would recommend doing that in the shorter term so that we can mitigate some of the sort of social media damage we've seen in the industry. Then going into more of the long term, over the next 2 to 5 years, that's looking at really establishing this advocacy group, really implementing the elements of Pfizer so that you have the infrastructure and the people to support this, and then really forming these relationships with other advocacy groups so that you're able to effectively hold these events. And that way, in the next 2 to 5 years, on an annual basis, you'll be able to host these runs in different charity and community engagements to really implement this going forward. And again, reshape the image so that it's about Pfizer as a brand, as a company that puts the consumers first, has the consumers at the center of their well-being, but moreover, the fact that everyone is a patient. And that's why it's a particularly difficult issue to address, but why Pfizer is also most equipped to address it.
Then moving on to the financial situation. So we're looking at a yearly basis. We've segmented to big major buckets. The first one being social media. So social media engagement involves a cost about $10,000 to $15,000 on a yearly basis. However, that's only a small fraction of the total costs. So the big major buckets we'll be looking at is, first of all, advertising. So we're looking at a full-blown advertising campaign, which involves production and celebrity endorsements, both for the $1 billion Cure media campaign and the advertising segments that we have mentioned earlier. Then finally, we'll be looking at just general advocacy and events in the nation. So we will be setting apart a separate foundation, which will be holding those yearly events, which we value at approximately $5 to $7 million. And then finally, we'll be taking a look at portal and web trading. So just this IT integration is one of the largest costs in the sense that we'll be building this platform from scratch and trying to integrate it within our sales staff to really streamline the development and the sales processes.
So, as a result of our Your Pfizer campaign, we're going to be able to re-establish trust with our consumers. This is crucial, and this is going to allow us, through this basis of trust, through this mutual understanding that every dollar that they give to Pfizer is spending on research and development to save lives. This understanding is going to allow Pfizer to deliver a consistent message on the basis of trust. And this message is going to allow positive feedback from the consumers and allow them to continue to purchase Pfizer products with an understanding that we are all patients and that we are all on the same page. On the side of the healthcare providers, we're going to be able to give them more of what they want, respond to the feedback that we received in terms of what they want to hear from the Pfizer sales representatives, and actually be able to give them the messages that they believe that they need from Pfizer. The next, can you hit the next slide, please?
Absolutely.
And then, as a result of this campaign, we're also going to be able to properly educate our consumers. They're now going to understand that the dollars that they're spending are actually going towards saving lives and towards saving patients who may be patients from Pfizer, patients such as you or me or their family and friends. The billions of dollars that the companies are making are actually going towards curing diseases that people around the world, including Pfizer employees, really care about. And this is going to transform the purchasing of Pfizer medication from a pain point to a source of trust and a positive interaction. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll now open the floor for questions.
Nice job.
Thank you.
With all the financials, costing, was that the cost, I'm assuming, for the whole campaign, whatever time it takes for the campaign?
Yeah.
Is that
Over
correct?
5 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And do you have an idea on kind of the lift that it would give you from a, for example, on a revenue perspective, just an estimation or projection or any surrogates that you would put forward to understand the revenue lift?
So ultimately, what we're looking at here is we didn't want to go out and quantify this in terms of an impact on revenue, because the real sort of foundation of why we were carrying out this strategy is to reestablish that trust and reestablish Pfizer as sort of somebody, as a company that is as much a patient as it is a pharmaceutical provider. So in the long run, we do see this having very positive implications on revenue, but when it came to actually making our projections, we thought it would be best to focus on sort of the more pressing issue at hand, which is the tarnished brand reputation of Pfizer and many other pharmaceutical companies within the industry.
Because if I can maybe add to that a bit, like one of the key challenges we've been trying to tackle, especially doing research, is the dip in the growth rate of the pharmaceutical industry. So recently dipped under 3%. So we ultimately want to reverse that and try to get it at kind of the higher than that 3% benchmark, which we currently are below.
My question's about the concept of an advocacy group, or Pfizer becoming an advocacy group. So the reality that we've had to deal with is that some patient associations or even some groups do not want to partner with us because of the lack of trust. So maybe give a little more detail on how you how would Pfizer become an advocacy group, and how would that help build trust, given the reality that we're facing in partnering with some of the patient groups?
I think taking that first step and showing that Pfizer in and of itself as an organization has a lot of members within it that they themselves would like to advocate for sort of healthcare issues. So even if we do face some difficulties in sort of launching these partnerships, sort of taking the initiative and having sort of a Pfizer advocacy group for issues that employees of Pfizer, they themselves are really passionate about and would like to advocate about, would go towards building that first step of actually establishing the trust and showing that even though there might be this lack of trust, that there are individuals within the organization that are actually willing to go out and have causes that they want to go and advocate for.
And at the beginning, if it requires a little bit more of a nudge to establish that trust, we would recommend actually making donations to some of these causes in order to really establish that Pfizer is invested both emotionally but also monetarily in the future trust in these relationships.
So I have a question around the run and that whole sponsoring of that. So there's a lot of these events that take place across the country, and you know, there's the Run for the Cure, there's the Auto Marathons, all kinds of, so how do you propose that we differentiate and make this something that people really want to invest in and be at versus all the others? And you know, how does this one stand out?
Absolutely. So the reason, first of all, that we proposed a run is because it works. There are so many, and we've seen that while it's a competitive space, when you're really able to get people on board, get people training, and get people fundraising, a lot of the largest advocacy groups and organizations have found that this is something that works for them. The way that we intend for this to work for Pfizer is by establishing these partnerships to get the groups on board and almost create a sort of competitive Canadian spirit. It was inspired a bit by the Google Impact Challenge of having different social entrepreneurship groups come together and then sort of the Canadian population vote on how to allocate the money. It would be the idea of having the Canadian Cancer Society, the Arthritis Association, different associations where Pfizer's drugs actually help to medicate these people, come together and each bring their different support groups and almost make it a sort of friendly competition. And also having the incentives of the donations to the groups that would raise the most money would help to increase that sort of spirit. And at the end of the day, all of these people are looking to raise more money for their organizations. So the initial opportunity of having those donations matched, we think would be a tremendous incentive. As well, we would look at actually launching them in the first years in Quebec and Ontario, as those are near the locations of the Pfizer plans. And that way we were hoping to also engage a lot of members of the Pfizer community themselves. So even if in the first year it was more of a small scale event, we believe that with Pfizer's brand reputation and the eventual partnerings with these trusted organizations, they'll be able to really establish a successful event.
Thanks.
I had a question around the investment slide, where you talked a little bit about, if I understand correctly, spending this money to really impact the brand image and corporate reputation, right? Versus drawing a direct ROI. My question for you guys is, how scalable do you think this initiative is? Is this something that if I invested more money, could I get better impact faster? And how much bigger could it go to get the results I'm looking for? What are your thoughts on that?
So I guess it depends on what kind of targeted promotional campaign we're looking at, right? So I guess when we're looking at advertisement in general, so there's always that kind of relationship that as much money as you put, you'll get more advertisement and probably reach out to more people. However, when we're looking at, for example, more on the healthcare professional side, I think it would be a relationship of just trying to invest in training and integration of the staff and the IT and make sure that the pipeline is as efficient as possible. So to answer your question, I say that the healthcare professional part of it would be not as scalable as the consumer segment, which focuses a lot on advertisement, social media investments, and marketing.
Thank you.
My question is related to the fact that you've mentioned several times during the presentation that you are all customers as well. So you're consumers. So how was your perception of Pfizer's evolving from this morning, then doing the presentation or the case today, and how is it now?
I think something that was really interesting for all of us and something that we, through this strategy, would like to highlight to other consumers and other patients is the fact that because of the way the reimbursement process actually works and the time it actually takes, that a lot of the money that's actually going in is going into research and develop and produce new cutting-edge drugs. And this is just by virtue of the way the industry works. So if there would be one key message that we would highlight, and one thing that I think I can speak for my partners as well, really surprised us was sort of the nature of this industry and how that means that the money needs to be invested in research and development.
Yeah, I think if you asked me this morning, I would have told you that I would have bought a generic drug probably, because I didn't understand what goes into the higher cost of branded drugs. Particularly when you think of a large company like Pfizer, you would think, okay, they have a lot of economies of scale. Why couldn't they drive their drug prices down relative to maybe these smaller players? But particularly in the Canadian landscape, we see Apotex, incredibly litigious companies who are just pursuing these generic drugs. And I think consumers don't understand that that's the landscape. And so really that educational piece, if anything, is we think the most important part of this campaign, because at the end of the day, we're driving for consumers to buy products, and consumers need to understand, in addition to trusting Advil, why Advil might cost more than a generic.
I guess if I could maybe just add my point, what actually I found very interesting in terms of just my perspective of Pfizer, which was maybe an overlooked part of the case, but the sense of identity that was described in the opening paragraphs of the documentation, and how Canada as a country has a lot to credit to development and research, especially in terms of innovation. So I just on top of my head brought up insulin as being one of Canada's great achievements, and I think that legacy of innovation is something that Pfizer kind of represents in a way.
Okay. Maybe one last question. Why? Why Bunville Consulting?
Yeah, that's
Inspired by a role model.
A case role model. He He really emulates a lot of Pfizer's good qualities.
If you look around, you can look at the guy who's ready to
Wearing Pfizer
Jordan
too.
Paul.
Okay, thank you.
Are you listening?